Hey, fifth graders, it's me again, Mrs. Griswold. It was really great to see a lot of you throughout your class meetings, and I hope to see more of you throughout the time that you guys meet. I'm back this week to finish up our book that we were reading last week, which was titled Pink. So as I said, this book was titled Pink and Say by Patricia Polacco, and this was or is an historical fiction text. So we know the characters are made up, but it takes place in a real historical time period with real setting, and some of the events may have been real, were based off of those historical events. So as a reminder, when we were reading last week, you guys were comparing two of our main characters, Pink and Say. And just to quickly summarize what we read, we know that Say was in the battlefield and Pink picked him up and he took him home to his mom so he could kind of get cared for. We started to learn a little bit about the two characters, and we know that both of the characters, Pink and Say, are kind and caring towards each other, but it seemed like Pink was a little bit more brave than Say. And we know this because Pink was willing to give things up to go fight back in the war, like leaving his mom by herself, even risking his life. And because he was really passionate about going back to fight for what he believed in. However, we know that Say was a little bit more cowardly and a little bit more hesitant, and we know this especially because he admitted that he was afraid and he had run away from the war in the first place. So he was a little bit nervous or scared to go back. So this is the major difference between these two characters. As we continue to read today, we are going to see if there are any other similarities and differences between our two characters. So we are going to finish up this book together, and I want you to just keep this in the back of your mind. What are the similarities between the two characters and what are the differences between these two characters? And I also want you to think about how did their traits affect the plot? So how do who they are and who they are as a person, how does this affect the story? So just as a reminder on this page, this is when he was admitting that he was really nervous about going back. The next morning we mustered to leave. We packed cornbread, salt pork, and dried beans. I would have done just about anything to stay, but my place was to go with Pink. I owed him that. Just as we were making the last sweep of the place, making sure that there were no signs of us ever being there, we heard wild screams and shrieks coming from the woods. "Martyrs!" Pink said as he grabbed a piece of wood for a club. Momo Bay took it from him. "Get to the root cellar. They ain't got no truck with an old dark woman. You get to the cellar, you hear?" We didn't like it, but then she pushed us. "Hurry, afore they're here." She lifted the root cellar door and shoved us in. "Don't come out till I tell you." We heard the porch steps creak as she ran from the cabin. "She's drawing them off," Pink whispered. When the Martyrs came in, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it up there above us. There was a terrible commotion as they ransacked, looking for food. Then there was silence. A single shot echoed through the trees outside. They let out a war whoop as they thundered off. We waited for a sign from Momo Bay, but it didn't come. Finally, we climbed out and ran outside only to see Momo Bay lying just beyond the porch. Whew, oh my goodness. We put you in their way by staying here. Pink cried as he rocked her in his arms. Her eyes were looking in a faraway place as he closed them. "Your son loves you, Momo Bay. Your son loves you," he sobbed as he kissed her. We both held her hand until there was no more warmth in it. After we buried her under the willow tree, we set out. Pink figured there were a 3 days' walk from Union troops. He watched the movement of the sun. Her words still rang in my heart. Her words about being brave. My steps were as sure now as they had ever been since the war started. We walked in the open as clear as country stroll until the morning of the second day. Then we knew we were being followed. "Take these," Pink said as he took his spectacles from his pocket. "If they catch me with them, there'll be trouble for sure." When they caught up to us, one yelled at me, "Where are you going with that darky, boy?" I was afraid to answer because of my northern accent. It would, dead sure, give us away. "Boy, what outfit you part of?" their leader barked. I couldn't answer. You Union boy? One jeered as he pulled my uniform from my knapsack. No, I ain't no Yankee. I got that from a dead one, I sputtered, trying to convince them. That was when we were grabbed. My words had given us away. We were prisoners of the Confederate Army. We were held up in a barn that night. Pink shivered with fever. I held him as he had done for me. The next morning we were thrown into a boxcar. We rode for what seemed 2 days, stopping many times. When the door slid open, the daylight was blinding. We were loaded into a buckboard and taken through town. The townsfolk looked hard at us. All they had left for us was mean looks and a heap of hate. We jarred to stop in front of gates and that marked the entrance to a stockade. It says Andersonville, Pink whispered. My heart stopped. I had heard of this place. It was one of the worst of the Confederate camps. When we were pulled from the buckboard, we fell hard to the ground. No, no, I begged as they pulled us both along. Because of his fever, Pink stumbled and fell. They dragged him along with such meanness. He did not protest until they forced us in different directions. Then he reached for me and said, "Let me touch the hand that touched Mr. Lincoln, say, just one last time." So if we stop and think right now, what are some of those traits of both Pink and Say? We know that Pink is still trying to stay brave and keep strong like he has been the whole time, even though he's sick and he's being dragged along. But we also know that right now that Say is showing a little bit more bravery, really trying to stand up for Pink and trying to help save him throughout this tough time of being captured. I watched tears fill his eyes and cleaved my hand to his until they wrenched us apart. They smote him and dragged him away from me. He looked back at me and tried to say something more, but they crossed his back with knotted hemp and pushed him along. Sheldon Russell Curtis was released from Andersonville prison some months later, weighing no more than 78 pounds. Andersonville was built to hold only 10,000 prisoners, but by the end of the war, it held 33,000 soldiers. There was no fresh water, no shelter, and no food. 13,000 men and boys died of starvation and dysentery. Sheldon Curtis returned to his home and recovered. He settled in Berlin Township in Saranac, Michigan. He married Abigail N. Bernard and fathered 7 children. He became a grandfather and a great-grandfather during his long lifetime. He died a very old man in 1924. Pincus Ailey never returned home. For him, there was to be no wife, no children, nor grandchildren to remember him. It was told that he was hanged within hours after he was taken into Andersonville. His body was thrown into a lime pit. I know this story to be true because Sheldon Russell Curtis told his daughter Rosa. Rosa Curtis Stowell told it to her daughter Estella. Estella Stowell Barber in turn told it to her son William. He then told me, his daughter Patricia. When my father finished the story, he put out his hand and said, "This is the hand that has touched the hand that has touched the hand that shook the hand of Abraham Lincoln." This book serves as written memory of Pincus Ailey since there are no living descendants to do this for him. When you read this, before you put this book down, say his name out loud and vow to remember him always. So after we've read that book, we've compared and contrasted the 2 characters throughout the story. And you guys did a nice job of doing that. So we know that their traits affected the plot. At the end, unfortunately, you guys did a really nice job of comparing and contrasting Pink and Say throughout the story and really talking about how it affected the plot, and because of their bravery, because of their kindness, because of how they were so caring, how that affected the rest of the events. So excellent job. This week you guys do not have a post for me on Schoology, but next week we'll be back to normal with reading another text. Please remember to reach out to your teachers or to me if you guys have any questions while you're completing your work at home. You guys have been doing an excellent job, and stay in touch and keep reading. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.